Hello, this is a short excerpt of the Push 3 Bible. The drum mode on Ableton Push absolutely rocks. It is really cool. And one of my favorite things about working with Push ever since the beginning back in 2013. When I saw it, I thought, that is very cool. And I'm going to show you in the next few videos why. And it is really a big topic. There is an awful lot to talk about and an awful lot of different ways to use it and get a lot of richness out of it. So let's get to it. So here we have the drum mode playground file I will have given you. And here we have a bunch of drum racks already loaded. So of course we're in note mode here, and we've got one of the tracks selected here. This first one is 808 core. 808 is a classic drum machine, and we can play it like this. And essentially the key thing to understand is that there's these three areas. There's this area here where we have these 16 pads that we can play. There's this area here which is going to define the length of the clip that we're making, the length of the idea. And then above here we have the sequencing area. This functions in the same way as the melodic sequencer if you've already watched content. Now what we can do is play these drums as we want. However, there are a few other things to mention before we go forward. And that is that every drum rack can contain up to 128 pads or sounds, and you can navigate this area up and down through those sounds like so. So I'm using the page or the octave up and down buttons here, and you can also use the touch strip to move somewhat less accurately, but it works all the same. I think if you use shift you can get a slightly better granularity there. What is also important to be aware of at this moment, but we won't look at it in much detail, is that the drum mode has some alternative layouts or sub-modes, depending on how you want to describe it. If we use the layout button, we can move to the second one called 16 Velocities, where, in short, what happens is that this area turns into various different velocities of that pad. So we can choose this pad and then go through different velocities, from low to high, running up that way. And that can be useful for certain kind of drum fills or certain kind of techniques, or being able to play the same sound in different ways using just this area. So interesting to know about. The next layout is the drum's 64 pads layout, where you can basically have 64 pads shown at any one time. So instead of only having 16, you can have 64. So for example, I could take one of these, hold on duplicate, and just paste it there. Paste this one here, paste this one here, and start building a much bigger drum rack. And you can also then move up and down it to access all of the 128 slots that you have in total. It looks a little bit odd when we do it this way, but once you fill them all in, you get used to it. Over in Ableton Live, a drum rack looks like this. All I want to mention is that you can move through the 128 slots or samples or pads like so. But one very important thing is this little button here, which is not something we can access from Push as of today, and doesn't look like they're thinking of changing that anytime soon, as far as I know. And what this means, and it's called the auto select button, is that if it's on, the moment that I tap a pad to play it, it also gets selected in Live or on Push. So what it looks like is, see here, you can see there's a bass drum selected, and if I now play this one, it highlights that one and shows rimshot there. Whereas in Ableton Live, if I'd come over and just turn this off and come back over to Push, if I now play them, it remains selected here, but I can, play the others. And it's certainly useful in some cases to have it one way or another. We won't go into it in detail just now, but it's important to know. What is also important to know is that you can hold down the select button to tap a pad without playing it, which is obviously very useful in various different situations. What is also super useful when working with drum racks, especially when they start getting very big, is you can color the different pads. If you hold down Shift and tap one of the pads, you can then choose a different color and keep on doing that for all of them and come up with your own system for keeping this clear. That's particularly useful if you end up with having something like a very big 64 pad layout here and you're trying to work out what's what. Again, it depends on how your muscle memory and visual memory work together, but something to keep in mind. One last little detail is that as you populate these other pads, you can see it starts to light up here in the touch strip, showing you that there are other pads where there are sounds present. Now, just a word about terminology. Of course, all of the ideas we record in Ableton Push go in clips. However, I notice I sometimes do use the word loop instead of clip when I'm talking about things recorded in the drum mode. I guess it's because they loop round and round. It's not super important, but it is something I do now and then, so just keep that in mind as we go forward. So looking in more detail at the loop selector mode, which I often call the standard or default drum rack mode, because it's the one that pops up first. So just make sure you're not in 16 velocities or 64 pads, but that you're in the loop selector. Let's also just check we don't have any clip here. No, we don't. So we're good. Now, I've explained layout in a previous video. What is, however, worth mentioning here is that yes, we have the 64 pads here. Yes, we have the length of the clip there, and then the length of the sequence. But we also have a resolution, and that is defined by the buttons here. And they will define what these steps are. So right now, they're 16th steps. And yeah, we'll see that as we program things. So let's just program something in, and we'll cover the first way of recording something, which is simply just to tap anywhere in here with the kick drum selected, for example, and it's going to create a clip. And it's created a clip of 2 bars here, so it's now running through that. I can now program in more kick drums. You see it moving through what it calls pages. So that's the first page. That's the second. And we can add some other things. So I've now selected the snare. Could also add some hi-hats. Very exciting. And let's just talk about the resolution aspect. So if I could now move this, for example, to 30 seconds, we can put in short little sort of trills or shorter gaps between the notes, essentially. And it's essentially zooming in and out in this view. If we'd want to see what's going on the second page here, as you see, it doesn't highlight. Just tap there, and it's going to highlight that part. There is this aspect where we can have it auto page between the two. So this always updates. Just tap them both at the same time. It's now going to move automatically between the 2 pages and highlight what's shown here and there. Practice that a few times. It takes a moment to get used to. And if you'd like to take it out of auto paging, you just tap one of the pages. I'm going to come back to 16ths because that is a very easy, clear way of working. I find I prefer myself to see what's going on in this area as much as possible. And we can program in some other notes. Like so. Now, if you'd just like to see what's going on each pad or in each sequencer, you could almost call it, you can also use select just to move between the different pads without playing them. So that means we can play this and just move between them to see what's going on. Again, this could be relevant in live situations or simply that you just want to have a look at what's what. What is also interesting to keep in mind at this moment is the fact that we can color the pads themselves. So we could say that the bass drum is going to be red and that the snare is going to be yellow. And that also means that as we move between them, we're going to see a clear visual highlighting of what's what, which could be very helpful when things get complicated. And it also passes through to the devices themselves and how they're colored here. And that's just an opportunity to talk about the way devices are structured on the drum rack just a little bit. So here, just make sure you're in device view and just be aware, and this will be talked about elsewhere, is that you can have the drum kit selected itself, or the pad, if we press on this button above it, or the contents of the pad. And they all have different information that they're going to give us. Different controls are going to give us access to. This is more about MIDI, this is more about the sounds, and this is more about all of the main controls for the drum rack, if it has its own main controls. And that will affect what we're seeing here and a whole bunch of other things that we can do. I won't talk about it more just now, but it's important to keep in mind. I'll just undo some of this coloring, and we're back to where we started. One sub-detail of working this way by creating a clip by just sequencing something in here, I'll just delete what we have here so the clip is gone, is that even if fixed length is off, but it would be set to, for example, 1 beat. So it is off and not active. If I would now program in something in here, it actually automatically makes the clip in the drum mode just 1 beat. So let's do that, for example, with 8 bars. Delete this clip. So remember, fixed length is off, it's not active, but if we create a clip in this fashion, it's now going to create a clip of 8 bars. So again, could be useful to know. And of course, if it is active, funnily enough, you'll have the same result. So again, it'll create 1 of 8 bars. So it's just an interesting thing about fixed length, and something that's not often talked about is that in some modes, it is actually active. And this is one of them. It's possible to record using the drum mode or using a drum rack into a clip completely live, and that involves using the record button. However, I'll just check a couple of settings here. First off is that the metronome is on and that there's a count-in active. I'm also just going to check the volume of my cue volume because sometimes it's just a little bit high. And let's turn that on. Okay, that sounds fine to me. And I'll turn that off for now. So how this works is that you simply press record once or twice if your push is behaving in that way. Remember to check the video I've made specifically about showing how to adjust this behavior. That's elsewhere in the Push Bible. And so here we go, press record once, count in. I can just record live, and I press record again to close the loop, to close the recording essentially. So you can see also in the clip here what's going on. Now at this stage, we could, for example, overdub, so press record again and look for something else to put in. And there we go. So we've already quickly recorded something in. Now I'll just stop for a second here because I am hearing some distortion on the 808. And I think that has to do with the volume that I set here, the gain. I've put it to 6. So if we play this back, there you could hear this sort of grittiness. Now we don't want that. So probably what it means is that this drum rack is not set up to really work that well with this gain function, which is surprising because it's one of the default tracks in Ableton Live. So I'm going to bring this down to -6, and I will add a device to just bring that up to a good level. And I'll add a limiter. So I'm just going to drop this here, and I'm going to add 12 dB of gain here. And now all it's going to do is bring that up in line with these other sounds. This is not something which is super related to drum racks, but could be useful in other scenarios. And if we now play things back, things should sound okay. Good, back on track. That was just a small part of the Push 3 Bible. If you have any questions about the course, do check the links below. Let me know in the comments or write to me directly. And in the meantime, take care.